I liked going and visiting my cousin Clay's family when I was younger. He was the same age as me, and many of my relatives lived out in the country, but his family was much different than the others. They were just more enjoyable to be around. They didn't just sit around and talk about the past all the time. They got up and actually did things. Plus, Clay and I liked the same kinds of toys, games, things of that nature. Together, we both had a huge collection of G.I. Joe action figures. The only big difference between us is that he liked Serpentor and I was loyal to the Cobra Commander. I was around 12 years old when this event happened. Clay had an older brother named Dale that I didn't really hang around with too much. He was always hanging out with his friends and rarely did anything with his younger brother, who was 4 years his junior. This year, Dale had just gotten his driver's license, and his father had given him an old, if somewhat small, pickup truck. He spent a lot of time out driving with his best friend when he got it. On the night this happened, Dale was supposed to be watching Clay and myself. It was definitely not his favorite thing to do, however. He also knew better than to leave us all alone, though. If Mom called the house and Clay answered it, and he wasn't home, their dad would blister his butt. So on this night, Clay wanted to go out driving with his buddy Kenny. The only way he could think to do this without getting in any trouble was to take Clay and I with him. He let us ride in the bed of the truck, which we'd always wanted to do anyway. After he picked up Kenny, we all stopped at the gas station to grab some bottles of pop. Then they headed out driving again. Dale liked to drive up through the hills. He would drive a lot faster than he probably should on these roads, though. I liked it, even though riding in the bed of the truck through the dark country roads was a new experience for me. Being in the back, we didn't exactly have the benefit of headlights, and there weren't street lamps out in the hills, so it was really dark. We could see all the stars in some parts, at least where the trees didn't reach over the top of the road, and that was a really cool experience. While Dave would drive pretty fast even when he probably shouldn't, he didn't drive so fast as to be extremely dangerous or anything. Clay and I pretty much enjoyed it, sitting in the two back corners of the bed of the truck, and the two of us were really enjoying the ride. We had to yell at each other in order to talk, but the feel of the wind was great, and so was everything else. Occasionally, one of us would get hit by a small, skinny branch or something, but we didn't mind that too much. Suddenly, though, Dale slammed on the brakes of the truck. He hit them hard and fast, and the truck stopped just as well. Clay and I tumbled forward a little bit due to the sudden stop. Luckily, we didn't get hurt, though. "Holy shit!" we heard Kenny exclaim from the front of the truck. Clay called out to his older brother, asking what was wrong. Dale didn't answer him, though. Clay and I were able to look out the front window, though what we saw scared the living crap out of us. We saw a man standing in the middle of this dark road. He looked dazed, and was stumbling around as if he were drunk. That was one thing, but when I looked closer, I noticed he seemed to be covered in blood. His hands and arms looked more covered than any part of his body. All of this happened in just seconds, and the moment the man saw us, he looked shocked. He ran off, stumbling into the woods, while the four of us sat there in shock. Clay started shouting at Dale to get moving out of there, but Dale didn't move. He told us to stay in the car. He got out and walked over to the side of the road. Well, Clay wasn't about to listen to his brother, and he jumped out over to the side of the road. He ran to the front of the truck, and then I saw this horrified look on his face, as he obviously spotted something else. You would think that such a horrified expression would signify to me that I probably didn't want to see it, but I also jumped out as well. I had to see just what it was that freaked him out so much. I jumped out of the truck and ran to the front. I nearly vomited when I saw what my cousins had been so shocked by. There was some sort of animal on the side of the road. At least something that had formerly been an animal, probably. It was about the size of a medium-sized dog, but it was so bloody and it had been skinned that we couldn't even tell what it was. It was just this bloody, goopy mess. We didn't really exactly know what to think of it. All we could guess was that either the man we saw had killed it, or something else had. We didn't know. Whatever it was, though, the whole scene was scary as hell to see. Dale and his friend considered going after the man to find out what had happened, but they decided wisely not to do so. They eventually hopped back into the car and drove around a bit more before taking us home. None of us ever mentioned this to our parents. It was such a strange and weird thing that we felt it might just be better not even talking about it. I'll give you a little background on my life growing up. It all leads to this happening. I've had some scary moments in my life, but this was one of the ones that I felt was truly threatening to it. I grew up with one sister and one brother. We moved around quite a lot while we were younger. My family, however, was from the Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia tri-state area. We visited them many times in my childhood, but we never really lived there ourselves. I grew up for the first 12 years of my life on military bases, so the country life was not something I was very used to. My parents got divorced when I was 11 years old, and my dad got custody of us. This was something that was actually pretty rare at the time it happened, but my mom had no job, no place to live, and no way at all to provide for us. So, in the end, we ended up with my dad. Well, my dad was a severe alcoholic. It was much worse for him after the divorce, too. Hardly even a single day passed where he didn't drink himself into a stupor. In a short period of time, he had several stays in psychiatric hospitals. I remember one time when he actually gave my older brother my mom's phone number, took his gun, and went off to kill himself. Although he ultimately did not do it, it was a terrifying experience for us kids. He was gone for several hours, and we had no idea at all if he was alive or dead during that entire time. It wasn't until my dad met the lady who would become my stepmother that he began to pull himself out of this hole a little bit. The suicidal stuff stopped for a while, and so did the stays in the psychiatric hospitals. But the drinking didn't stop with them, and there were some really horrible times for us kids once those two got married. My dad, for some reason, was just completely obsessed with living out in the country, so he took a disability leave from the military in order to move out there. If I remember correctly, he was given a 3-year leave, at the end of which he would be evaluated again. If he was deemed fit to serve, he would serve out the rest of his enlistment. I guess that's not really very important to the story, though, but it gets us to where we're going. We moved out to Ohio at that point, and I had my very first taste of living out in the country. I can't say I'd been looking forward to it too much myself, but once we were there and I got to exploring the country, hiking, and finding all sorts of new things, I began to like it a whole lot more. We lived in St. Clairsville, Ohio for around a year. I absolutely hated living there. I was bullied a lot at the school. When summertime came around, it made me appreciate living in the country a whole lot more. We lived way out in the hills, so there was no way I was going to have to see any of the people who bullied me at all. That lasted about a year. As became a pattern for us over the next few, my dad would stop paying his rent and get us kicked out of the house we were in. So in the end, we ended up moving around a whole lot. The reason I keep bringing this up is that his drinking just got worse and worse. He would even on occasion actually let us go hungry as long as he had his beer. Getting drunk was more important to him than anything else. On the night this all happened, we were in Wheeling, West Virginia, visiting my stepmother's family. Of course, my dad was drinking beer with his father-in-law, getting just completely drunk off his ass. When it was time to go home, he was completely wasted. But, as normal with him, he would still be the one to drive home. It was about an hour-and-a-half drive from their house to ours. With my dad so extremely drunk, he would get mean and oftentimes violent. We knew this, and so we didn't dare to challenge him. Not even my stepmom, who was an evil bitch in and of herself, would call him on anything when he was in one of these really drunken moments. Well, my dad was so wasted that he turned off the main road and took a wrong road out into the hills. My older brother, being the only one who might have been able to stand up to him, wasn't really paying attention. I noticed it though, and it bothered me. I was too scared of my father's abusive rage to say anything though. We went driving through these long, winding, hilly areas in the dark, none of it looking familiar in any way. I mean, we were driving up and down hills on gravel roads, going places with tons of trees and stuff, but I could tell it wasn't somewhere we were used to being. I kept wanting to mention it to my dad, but I kept hoping that one of these country roads would happen to intersect with a road that would take us home. I could tell as time went on that everyone knew that my dad had gotten us all lost, but no one dared to say anything yet. It wasn't until he started to become visibly agitated that we realized things might get very bad. Of course, with my dad's brain so heavily intoxicated, it wasn't helping him be able to find a way home. We kept driving down random roads, seeing endless swaths of trees but never finding anything. It was around that time that my younger sister piped up in order to help us figure something out. She was 7 years old at the time, and still at that age where she didn't know what would or would not set our dad off. She asked him something innocent about why he'd taken the wrong road and when we would get home. My dad lost it after that. He pulled the car to the side of the road, told all of us kids and our stepmom to get out. When my stepmother protested, he told her that unless she wanted to get backhanded, she would get out of the car. Not knowing what he would try to do, the four of us obeyed. We all stood by the side of the road. My dad then got out of the car. He always kept a revolver under the seat, and we all noticed that he had the gun in his hand. He forced all three of us kids to stand by the ditch on the side of the road. He then went in a tirade about how if we thought that we could take him in a fight, we should try to do it right then. He babbled on and on about it being our fault we had gotten lost because we hadn't told him he had made a wrong turn. Then, right away also got mad at us, accusing us of thinking that we were better than him, as we knew which way to go. The whole time, in his drunken stupor, he kept waving this gun around. I don't really think my older brother was scared. He was 2 years older than me, and he wasn't really scared of very much. He was a huge guy, even at 15 years old, but I know that my sister and I were terrified. He just kept swinging the gun around randomly and had the gun cocked with his finger on the trigger the entire time. Very often it was pointed at one of us as it was flailing around. It would simply take a jerk of his trigger finger to shoot one of us kids on the side of the road. I'm not sure how long this went on, and truthfully, I didn't even pay attention to most of what he ranted about. I do remember hearing the gun go off, though. I cringed and checked my sister to make sure she hadn't gotten shot. Fortunately, no one did. My dad then stumbled over to the ditch on the other side of the road. He proceeded to vomit, and after that was done, he passed out. My stepmother tried to make us get him and help him into the car, but we refused to do it. My brother pushed her out of the way, and he got my sister and I into the car. He did not have a driver's license, but he knew how to drive. He drove my sister and I back to the house, leaving my drunken dad and stepmother there. I don't really know what happened after that. I know once my stepmother and dad had gotten home, they confronted my brother about it, but my brother told my dad that if he ever did anything like that again, he wouldn't live through it. No longer being brave from being drunk, my dad and stepmom were put in their place and dropped it immediately. I wish I could tell you this was the last time something like that happened, but unfortunately, as is sometimes the case, it wasn't. I was always different than everyone else in my family. Even to this day, most of my family members tend to go to sleep early in the evening and get up early in the morning. That was never my thing. Personally, I've always enjoyed being up when it's dark outside. I've always just liked the night. My mind works better when it's dark out. I get more creative and more focused. Plus, I just feel completely better when it's nighttime. I grew up in the country, albeit in several different houses and places. But whatever those places were, they were houses in the country. Being the sort of person who liked to spend a lot of time alone, this worked out really well for me actually. I had so much time to simply just be by myself and be left to my own thoughts. I would very often go for walks in both the day and night. I didn't really get too scared at night. I wasn't afraid of the dark or anything, so for me, going on late-night dark walks was not that unusual of a thing. We hadn't lived in the house that we lived in when this happened for very long. It was set in the front of a holler. The road was a gravel one, but our house wasn't too far down from the paved road. This road was at the foot of the hills, so we were not in the hills but on lower ground. There were a decent number of houses on both sides of that gravel road, but they weren't really close together by any means. There was enough room to feel like you were out in the country, and that things were at least somewhat private. I think out of all the places we ever lived, I liked that one the most. However, there were some weird things going on in that area. A lot of times, even in the daytime, there was this creepy feeling I would sometimes get. It was that proverbial feeling of being watched even though no one was around. I was never able to pinpoint where it was coming from either. It wasn't unusual for me to take walks during any time of day. I liked to walk up the roads that led up into the hills. Most were dirt roads, but I liked nature, and I loved to see all the different types of trees and things like that. I mostly really liked the birds in the daytime, and at night I just loved the ambient noises. I liked the sound of frogs, the chirping of crickets, and the hooting of owls, all those noises of the night. I very rarely ran into people when I took the walks. There were houses up in the hills, of course, but they were even further apart than the houses at the road at the bottom. Anyway, though, there was one night when something very bizarre happened, and I have no explanation for it even to this day. I couldn't sleep on this particular night. I just kept tossing and turning and thinking of various things. Usually it was my mind being in overdrive that kept me from sleeping when I was younger. I just always had so much to sleep about. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to get any, and that a walk would be the best thing to help me clear my mind. I got up and trotted out of my house for a walk. I figured a nice walk into the hills would be just what I needed. If I took my time and just relaxed, I'd get back and feel a lot better. So I set out. I turned off the gravel road onto a dirt road that led out onto the hills. This was a way I had taken many times before whenever I went out for a walk. Although I took a flashlight with me, the light of the moon was enough for me to be able to see my way. I usually used my time during these walks to do some deep thinking. The wind and the breeze and the sounds were all so calming, I'd just enjoy the walk and get completely lost in my thoughts. At one point though, as I was walking down a hill, I was surprised to see someone else walking towards me. It looked like an old man, maybe his 70s or something like that. I was never really good at guessing the age of those I don't know. Although I was quite surprised to see someone else walking out here on this night. I wasn't afraid or anything like that. I wasn't especially scared of a random old man. We just kept walking toward each other, and I waited for the inevitable greeting between two walkers that always seemed compulsory. When the guy got up to me, I looked at him. I will admit that I only gave his features a cursory glance. I hated to look at anyone more than necessary. I always thought that would make other people uncomfortable. Good evening, I said to him as we passed by each other. The crickets are out tonight, huh? He asked in response to my greeting. We then walked past each other. I put the thought of the man out of my mind pretty quickly and just continued on with my stroll. It wasn't too long, though, before I noticed something else. It seemed that there was now someone else walking toward me on the road. It had been strange enough to have encountered the first man at this time of night, but to find a second person was just completely bizarre. Before the man got too close to me, I looked as carefully as I could at him. The closer he got, the better I could make him out. Now, I hadn't paid a lot of attention to the first man, but I did have a glance at him. The second man looked to be around the same age as the first man, and he also appeared to be dressed the same as well. My mind started spinning. Was it the same man? I asked myself, knowing that it was impossible for that to be true. As the guy walked closer to me, I did watch him closer, and I could have sworn it was the exact same guy I had just seen before. I paid attention to his face, his clothes, and his hair, and this time, I had no problem looking too long. This must be the same man. Good evening, I said to the old man as he passed me. The crickets are out tonight, huh? he asked me as he walked by. Hearing those words made me stop in my tracks. I'd been thinking I was kidding myself that it could have been the same man both times, but he had replied the exact same way. I was surprised and, I suppose, a little bit scared. It was such an odd happening. There was no way the original man could have ended up in front of me again. He would have had to have gotten off the road and run at inhumanly fast speeds through the forest in order to do it. I shook my head and tried not to think too much about this weird experience. It was probably just a weird coincidence. I'd leave it at that. I was working further down the street when I got the start of my life. There was a third man walking toward me. Encountering one man out at night was unusual enough. 2 was completely unheard of, but 3 was just improbable. As the man got closer, I realized it was another random old man. I felt a chill run down my spine. What exactly was going on here? The nervousness increased when I realized it was a similar-looking old man again. Since I had gotten a good look at the second man who had passed me by, I could tell even from a distance that the man approaching me was dressed exactly the same. This time I felt nervous and a tad bit scared as the pedestrian approached me. But the closer he got, I realized he looked just like the man I had already seen walk past me twice. This time when he got close to me, I tried to look away, but I just couldn't do that. I had to see what he looked like. As he came up right next to me, I was 100% sure it had been the same man I had seen before. Hey there," I said nervously as the man approached me. I tensed, waiting to hear what he would respond with. "The crickets are out tonight, huh?" he asked and walked by me. I couldn't look back after he passed by. I was very scared by this strange occurrence, and I just wanted to move on. There was a road not too far ahead that I could turn off of that would lead me down to the main gravel road. While I was walking, I was nervous. I was expecting that same old man to appear before me a 4th time. I kept waiting for him to appear as I walked on. It was a scary feeling because it was so dark out, and I was feeling quite eerie after what had happened. Enough time had passed that I eventually arrived at the main road before seeing a 4th incarnation of the old man. I turned onto that road and walked back down the main one. I was expecting to see the man walk by a 4th time, but I was able to make it off down the hill and then onto the main road back home without encountering him again. I ended up telling this story to my family, who didn't believe me. My sister, who was older than me, told me that there was this story she had heard at school. Supposedly an old man who was killed while taking a night walk in the hills by where we lived. People had reported seeing him passing them multiple times while walking out there. She thought I had heard the story before, which I hadn't, and was pretending that I had seen it happen. It was a terrifying thing to experience, even if it might not seem so explaining it back like this. Seeing something so unexplainable and weird, even thinking of it now, it just makes me shiver.